When you unbox your reset kit, you'll find 3 pre-populated grids with 50mm foam pegs, an extra grid with the turret cutout, should you want to use this, 20 extra 50mm pegs, 30 82mm pegs to be used as standoffs, and 20 peg collars to use with the 82mm pegs. You'll notice that each of the grids have empty holes in some of the grid slots. Step 1, you'll want to take the 82mm foam peg and the peg collar and insert the peg into it. You'll want to repeat that for all of the standoff locations for each grid. Step 2, you'll want to take each of those 82mm pegs that have the peg collars on them and insert each of those on the bottom side of the grid. Inserting the 82mm pegs with the peg collars on them into the grid allows the grid itself to stand off from the bottom of the case so that you can depress each of the pegs to create the loadout that you need. Once you repeat that across the other grids, you should have the standoffs inserted on the bottom so it looks like this, which again will allow the reset grid to stand off from the bottom of the case and allow for the pegs to move up and down freely. If you opt to build out the turret grid, what you'll need to do is take pegs from one of the existing grids that you won't be using and simply remove the 50mm pegs from the existing grid and insert them into this grid, which you'll need to repeat for all of the pegs. As you're inserting the 50mm pegs into the cutout panel, you'll want to make sure that when you push them in, there's roughly a 1/4 inch showing on the bottom. If you choose to build out the optional cutout panel, you'll want to have the top and bottom identified. The top is the flat surface. The bottom has the little stepped ridge here, which will help you identify that. To build this out, you'll need to take the 50mm pegs from the other center section and remove them to insert into the cutout panel. When you insert it, make sure you've got about a 1/4 inch showing on the bottom with the majority of the peg on the top. So for the last step, what you'll need to do is insert the reset grid into the case. For the 1750, you'll have 3 panels. To help identify which panel goes where, you'll notice in the back of the case where the wheel well cutouts are, that panel will have cutouts in the actual grid, so you'll know that that goes in the back of the case. And again, you'll want to put the panel facing down with the standoffs touching the bottom of the case. The center section has 4 squared corners, so that'll be easy to identify. We'll put that in the center. And finally, the other end has 2 squared corners and 2 rounded corners, which the rounded corners will go into the front of the case. Once all 3 panels are inserted in the case, it's ready to be customized for your mission. And should you decide to use the cutout panel, again, that will replace the center section, which will go here, and it can be rotated 180 degrees depending on where you need that cutout to be oriented. And that's it. Once you have all 3 panels in the case, it's ready to be customized for your gear. So as you unbox your 1720 reset kit, in the box you will find 4 bags of 82mm foam pegs, 2 bags of 50mm replacement pegs, 3 bags of the peg collars, the center section, as well as the center section with the optional cutout, and then both of your end pieces pre-populated with the 50mm foam pegs. For the 1720 case, you'll notice that each of the panels have open slots where you will insert the standoff pegs. The first step is to take the 82mm standoff peg, insert it inside of the peg collar. You'll want to repeat that for the 7 holes in each of the end grids, as well as the 4 open areas in the center grid. The next step is to take each of those standoffs that you've put the peg collar on and insert those into the bottom of the grid. The way you'll identify the bottom of the grid is the flat surface is on top. There's a little stepped section here on the bottom that'll help you identify each. And you'll want to make sure that as you get the grid, there's about a 1/4 inch sticking out on the bottom of each 50mm peg. You take your 82mm standoff peg with the collar on it, insert it into the open slot on the grid. You'll want to repeat that for each of the open slots to effectively stand this grid off. If you choose to build out the optional center cutout panel, again, you can take the 50 millimeter pegs from the other center panel, remove them, and insert into this grid, leaving about a 1/4 inch visible on the bottom of the panel. You'll repeat that for the entire grid using the 50 millimeter pegs from the other center section, including the standoff pegs so that the panel is able to stand off in the bottom of the case. The last step is to take each of the grids that you've put the standoff pegs into and place them into the case. Each grid has a specific area it fits into your 1720 protector case. In the rear of the case where the wheels are, you'll notice the wheel wells extend into the case, and the corresponding grid has a cutout for those wheel wells. You'll want to place that into the back of the case. The center section is the smallest of the 3 grids. That goes in the center. And on the end, this grid, you'll notice, has 2 square corners and 2 rounded corners. The rounded corners will face the top of the case. If you decide to build out the optional center cutout panel, that would replace the center section. Also noting, you can rotate this 180 degrees to orient the cutout where you need it. Once you've got the panels inserted into the case, it's ready to be customized for your gear. All right, for your 1700 reset kit, when you open the box, what you'll find are 2 bags of 50 millimeter pegs, 3 bags of the 82 millimeter standoff pegs, and 2 bags of the peg collars for the standoffs. You'll also find 2 reset grids pre-populated with the 50 millimeter pegs. Once you get everything out of the box, you'll notice that both your grids have open slots in the grid. This is where you'll insert the standoff pegs. So the first step will be to take the 82 millimeter foam standoff peg and the peg collar and insert the 82 millimeter foam peg into the peg collar. So it looks like that, flush with the bottom. You'll want to do this for all 15 standoffs that are required for the 2 grids. The next step is to insert the standoffs into the grid. When you insert the 82 millimeter standoffs into the grid, you'll want to do so from the bottom. The best way to identify the top and bottom of the grid is the top is flat and smooth, whereas the bottom has a small channel cut into it. Once complete, you'll have all your standoffs into the grid, and you can move on to the next step, which is inserting into the case. For the 1700, you'll have 2 grids. To install the first grid, starting at the back of the case where the wheel cutouts are inside of the case, you'll notice the wheel wells. That corresponds with the cutout in the reset grid here. You'll go ahead and place this in the back of the case with the cutouts. The second grid, you'll notice that there are 2 right-angled edges and 2 rounded edges. You'll want to place the rounded edges into the front of the case. And that completes the installation for your Gen 2 1700 case. If you have a 1700 Gen 1, you'll need to make a few adaptations to the reset grid as it comes out of the box to fit in your Gen 1 1700 case. To make these changes, you'll just need a pair of diagonal pliers to be able to cut some of the plastic grid to adapt for your 1700 case. As you can see here, this is a 1700 reset back panel as it comes out of the box. This version has already been altered for a 1700 Gen 1 case. The difference here is marked by scored lines in the panel itself, where you will see where you need to cut. To prepare your reset grid for the Gen 1 alterations, you'll go ahead and start by removing the pegs where the notch is on the panel, because this is where you will take your diagonal pliers to cut some of the material away. We'll set those pegs aside. You'll reuse some of them. What you'll need to do after removing those pegs is find the score lines that exist on the grid, showing you exactly where you need to cut. When ready, take your diagonal pliers and you'll want to snip here, here, the corresponding connecting points there, and repeat the same on this side. So you'll be removing these 3 grids and these 3 grids, but you're leaving these central 3. Those will remain. Once done, it should look something like this with the center grid remaining. You can put the 50 millimeter pegs back in, leaving about a 1/4 inch on the bottom. Because the Gen 1 1700 case is also slightly narrower than Gen 2, you'll also need to remove these locating tabs on the side of each grid. You can either use your diagonal pliers or a metal file. Once complete, your grid should look something like this, with the 3 grid sections removed from each side where the scored lines are to show you where to cut, as well as the locating tabs on the side completely removed. You can also take a file to smooth out some of these cut edges if required. Once you've got the grid altered for your 1700 Gen 1, it's ready to drop in and load out for your mission.